Jason, welcome back. Thanks. It's been a few months since we last talked.
Yeah.
I think we've got a pretty good conversation, hopefully today. We talked last time a lot about the emerging technologies and what's happening in the threat landscape. I want to pivot the conversation to something that hit home for me as a parent of 13-year-old twins. How this is affecting families and children, and a lot about what you're seeing with respect to how either threat actors or people that have pretty bad intentions that want to exploit children. What's happening.
Yeah, and it's just getting worse, Chris. I mean, anybody can Google what's going on in the world right now, and it's not pretty. And I think we're going to have a good conversation about how parents can help protect their children online.
All right, great.
So there's a certain segment of the population that's fairly tech savvy, and they know what to do to protect themselves. But then there's folks who aren't as tech savvy. And I'm thinking about minors, I'm thinking about the elderly, and I think that's a good place to start today.
Yeah, I've got 13-year-old twins, and so I'm dealing with this every single day. And they think they know everything.
Yes.
Which is
just like we did when we were kids.
Interesting. And they have access to a lot of these technologies, and it's hard as a parent. You've got to balance social media is a part of the world we live in, and so you can't completely lock them off. But how do you help them enter social media and engage with it in a safe fashion? I work a lot with my son, who is constantly sort of bouncing around, changing accounts, opening new accounts. These new social media platforms that are out there. Gaming platforms is a big one. What sort of attacks are you seeing or threats are you seeing? Let's maybe go to gaming first, because I think it's an interesting area that a lot of people don't think about as a social platform, but for kids it is. What are you seeing in the online gaming space?
Yeah, I think it's worthwhile talking about the motivation of some of the attacks at first. So, you and I have been in cybersecurity for a long time, and traditionally what we've seen is financially motivated attacks. That's people attacking companies or individuals via phishing attacks or other types of hacking or threats like ransomware. But they do that in order to get a financial return, in order to steal money from an organization or an individual. And we can rationalize that. We understand why they're doing that. That kind of makes sense to us. Obviously, it's a crime and they need to be prosecuted. But that's one set of attacks that we're seeing. The other set of attacks, the other driver are, what I would describe as maybe nihilists or folks who want to exploit minors. And that's an entirely different thing. And to me, that's the scarier of the two. And I think that's what we're seeing particularly prevalent with children in online platforms, because they know children typically don't have large bank accounts that are not going to steal funds from them, but they are going to attempt to exploit them to do things that they wouldn't otherwise do.
Yeah, I think that as a parent, that's incredibly scary. And it also, as you said, when that motivation, I think we unfortunately understand people that are looking for money, right? That makes sense. Right. This other group that's looking to exploit minors, it's something I don't necessarily understand the motivation behind, right. Which means, I struggle to figure out how to, teach my children to stay safe in that environment. Right. What are these threat actors doing? Like, how are they actually trying to get at minors, as an example?
Yeah. Well, think about it when we were kids, right? So my parents always warned me, don't talk to strangers. Beware of the guy who pulls up in a van and offers you candy or you want to see a puppy. And those threats are real. I mean, I actually had an incident like that when I was 10 years old, walking back from a swimming pool by myself, and there was a guy who pulled up in a car, didn't know who he was, and he tried to get me in the vehicle. Those things don't happen as much anymore because of cameras and cell phones and everything else. But there's an online equivalent now, right, where you've got these attackers who are trying to coax children off of these platforms, whether it's Facebook or Roblox or TikTok or whatever.
Discord.
Like
that,
yeah. And then they try to get them into more private chats, whether it's Telegram or Signal or private Discord groups. And that's where they use psychological pressure to coerce these children into doing things that they wouldn't otherwise do.
Yeah, and I think so. From personal experience, I think a lot of these, these bad people. Another good term for them, other than that, right? They're offering things that are enticing to kids. So yes. It's not candy, but it might be Roblox, right? If you're on the Roblox platform, or it might be an account that has a bunch of skins if you play Fortnite or something like that. So they're offering them something that has a lot of value to the child inherently, in order to gain trust, in order to gain familiarity, and then, oh, by the way, it's easier for me to talk on this platform. Right. Do you have an account there?
Yes.
And then, one of the things as an adult, as a parent, when my child comes and says, hey, I'd like to add I want to add a Discord, or I want to add a Snapchat, or I want to add some other Telegram, something like that. Why, who are you talking to, and making sure you're aware of what sorts of conversations they're having on is incredibly important, because it starts off very innocent in many cases, especially in their mind, and then it can quickly accelerate to something more malicious than that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And when you're online with children talking to other folks on these platforms, they just assume they're other children their age, but they might not be, right? These could be adults who are very well practiced in psychological techniques to entice these children, to befriend them and pull them off into areas where they can have darker types of conversations. Another threat vector, another way that these folks operate, is that they'll get them to go to links on the web that contain malicious software that will download onto the child's computer or phone or whatever else, and start to pull off personal information that can then be used against that child, or send them phishing emails, which essentially do the same thing. They can get their username and password by getting them to click on a link that they control. So there's various different ways that these attackers can get information about the minor and use that information to get the minor to do whatever they want them to do.
Yeah, and in some cases, these threat actors or bad people have motivation financially as well. So it's not that they just have that, but a lot of times they know a child could be using their parents' computer.
Yeah.
Not a lot of kids have a dedicated gaming computer that they use, so they might use a parent's computer that could have passwords and credentials and access to things that you might not want them to have access to, and then exactly that, right? Lead them to, why don't you click on this link? This will get you a free account. This will get you your Roblox. So it'll get you something that you're looking for, and then all of a sudden you're exposed. A lot of those things are silent listeners too. So as a parent, making sure that you've got the right malware detection set up on your PC. Again, talking to your children around awareness that if it's too good, if it's something you want, let's speak about it before you go and follow through.
Yeah, and I hate to say this, but frankly, that's best case scenario, right? Best case scenario is they're trying to somehow siphon some money from the child or the children's parents. Worst case scenario is that they're going to blackmail or somehow coerce these minors into doing things like sending them nude photographs or harming themselves or harming other people.
Yeah.
I mean, some of these people and I don't use this term lightly, but I mean, they're evil. Mm-hmm. And there's evil people out there exploiting children on these platforms.
Yeah, I think the number of stories where, children have caused self-harm and, they're doing things that, they really shouldn't be involved in, and then, guilt and all those things is really scary.
Right. So you talked about your son. What controls, what things do you have in place other than, don't do this?
Yeah, so a couple of different things, depending on the OS and the platform of the phone. One of the things you can do is just set timers around how long they can be involved in these, or what times can they be using these particular apps, and then controls on them downloading new apps on their phones. There are similar technologies that you can put on any of their devices, whether it's their an iPad or something like that, or a laptop. And so making sure that I have control over what's being installed is a really, really important thing, because it just allows me to engage before they put some new platform, new technology on, and then I can talk to them about it. Putting controls around how long, the screen time or whatever time that they have for any particular app is also an important one, because a lot of times when kids are getting engaged in this, they're not only being kind of pulled into, places that you wouldn't want them, more private chat, but they're being pulled into different times. So later at night when it's sort of quieter, and the threat actors know that parents are less likely to be involved when it gets super late at night, and so they'd prefer to engage when at those times versus in the middle of the day when people are around. So making sure that there are controls on when they're using these apps is important, and then having a lot of dialogue, right, around what is normal and okay behavior. One of the really interesting things is if you're, especially in gaming, their engagements happen with a lot of adults because gaming is so popular and we grew up with gaming and it's become a part of our core culture. You have a lot of adults that game. right? They actually use, Call of Duty or Fortnite or whatever it might be, and they play that. And so they're used to hearing adult voices, especially if there's voice chat on these games. They're used to hearing, and if there's things like proximity chat, which is something that I recommend that you turn off in games and you don't allow your children to be involved in a proximity chat. Proximity chat, for your just in case you're not aware, is when you're in a game and you're playing and there's other people you don't know inside that game that are in your proximity. They can actually hear you talking to your group that you're with, and then they can engage with you and talk to you as well. And so again, that's an uncontrolled engagement with whoever is playing the platform, and then they start, you don't know what goes on in that conversation. So usually I make sure that proximity chat is turned off in any of the games that he's playing. I usually know the parties, so if he's playing with 3 or 4 different people, at least be aware of who those are, how he's met them, and overall have a pretty important discussion around what you talk about, what you don't talk about. You don't talk about addresses. You don't talk about anything that's inappropriate. You don't talk about bodies. You don't talk about races. There's just a series of things that you don't speak about in order to make sure that there's a more safe environment.
Other than disabling proximity chat, are there anything else that these platforms are doing to assist parents to help control these situations?
For the most part, not. There's a pretty big gap between what these platforms are required to do and what they want to do in order to protect children. You can see there's there's a lawsuit going on with Facebook at the moment, right, with respect to an insider who came out and said there are hundreds of thousands of cases of child solicitation that are happening every single day on the Facebook platform, and there is very little, if anything, that they're doing to control it. You're seeing legislation activities and things like that to try to rein it back in. But there aren't a whole bunch of safety features when it comes to what sort of messages are coming across, the content of those messages, in order to push those back to a parental authority figure that can help engage if you need to. So really, it's a lot about you taking a proactive approach to understanding what apps they have, who they're talking to, and then making them aware of what's an appropriate conversation to have or not have.
Yeah. So, this is very similar to our life in corporate cybersecurity, right? Where, we've worked with federal law enforcement, Secret Service, FBI, amazing people. At the same time, they just don't have enough resources to chase all this stuff down, right? So it goes back on the platforms, and it sounds like they're not always doing the best job. They're probably overwhelmed as well. So that leaves the parents, right? The parents are kind of the last, or maybe the first line of protection for children who are online.
Yeah, I agree. We talked a little bit about these, these individuals who are looking to exploit children. I think there was an article that came out, I think it was in The Guardian recently, with a study done out of the UK about this COM group that was specifically focused on targeting children for sexual abuse or any sort of self-harm or suicide, which is really concerning. Have you heard of that? Or
So I haven't heard about the COM group, but these sorts of groups have been active for several years now. Probably the best known one is the 764 network, which started in 2015 out of Texas. And it's probably similar to what you're talking about, where they coaxed minors from primarily Minecraft into private Discord groups. They would then blackmail these minors to either send nude photos or harm their pets or even carve usernames from the Discord group into their body. Absolutely vile individuals. The good news is they found that group, who interestingly was 15 years old when he started doing this, was charged and then subsequently sentenced to 80 years in prison in 2023. The bad news is there's been a ton of copycat groups sprout up since then doing very, very similar things. So the COM group may be similar to 764 network.
Yeah, that's incredibly scary. I want to pivot into some of the ways that they get users off these kids off of the platform. And I think phishing is one scenario, one thing that they're using pretty effectively. What are you seeing with phishing attacks and how they're getting minors out of the platform and going into different environments?
Yeah, phishing's interesting, right? You think that would be a solved problem by now. Phishing has been going on for 30 years at this point. And the big email providers like Google with Gmail still haven't solved that problem. And there's a lot of corporate software which will help protect companies against phishing attacks. But from an end user's perspective, it's still very, very challenging. I don't know about you, but I still get emails and texts sometimes, and I'm like, well, this looks real. Let me take a closer look at it. So I don't think phishing is going away anytime soon. And for tech-savvy people, it's even challenging. For minors, it's going to be almost impossible sometimes. Same for our more elderly people who didn't grow up on email like we did. Other means that they're getting minors off of these platforms is just, I would say, psychological blackmail, right? So, oftentimes they're just repeating a playbook that they've known to be successful. They know what words to use in order to coax these children off of the platform because they've done it before or they've seen other people do it before. So it's not like they're inventing a new routine every single time. They're just executing a script that they've seen work before. So it's going to be befriend this individual. It could make them think that there's possibly a romantic relationship that's budding, or hey, there's something really interesting that I want to show you over on Discord or Telegram or wherever else. So rarely does it start with something like a threat. It starts with, hey, I'm a friend and I want to show you friendly things, and before you know it, things can spiral very, very quickly.
Yeah, I think what's concerning about this, and having kids myself, is both of them have had people reach out that have tried to get them off of the platform or befriend them, that come to find out were adults that lived in foreign countries. And had I not been paying attention, they could be one of the many stories that are out on, you can just Google and see the number of kids who have, again, sent inappropriate photos, have harmed themselves, have committed suicide, horrible, horrible situations. And so it's likely happening to most children, and I don't think that people are aware of the sort of proliferation of this sort of thing going on, and technology is just making it easier and easier. You mentioned early the AI has lowered the barrier for threat actors to go after this. We've talked about phishing and how phishing it's been around for 30 years and it's getting more and more sophisticated. Again, the stories are out there. What are you seeing, and what's a focus for some of these threat actors to get?
AI is amazing, right? We use it every day in our jobs and our personal life, but there's also a dark side to it, and that's especially prevalent with deep fakes, and not just video, also audio as well. The AI has gotten so good at this point that these attackers, vile individuals, I'm not sure what the right term for these folks are, but they could take a child's photo from Facebook and then they could create a deep fake of that child nude at that point. Okay, so they have a fake picture of a nude child. What are they going to do with that? Well, what they can do is blackmail the child at that point and say, hey, I have a nude photo of you and I'm going to make this public unless you do the things that I want you to do. And that technology, it's commonplace these days. There's open source models that if you have a beefy computer at home, you can create these things inside of your home, right? You don't have to use some sort of fancy open AI provider anymore. You can do it yourself. And the same with voice. And what I'm saying with voice is cloning children's voice or minors' voices. And that's very easy to do as well. So if you have a minor who's posting a TikTok video or a Facebook video, all it takes is 30 seconds of them talking, and they can replicate that voice to say whatever they want to say. And maybe it's not perfect, but if you're an elderly person who's not up to date on these technologies, you could, for example, make a fake phone call to that minor's grandparents, pretending to be that child, asking for money, for example. And it's very hard to distinguish from what's real these days, what's actually reality and what's fake.
Yeah, I think One of the challenges is, as we become more digital, right, and our identities become more digital, and for kids, it's almost the totality of what they, how they engage with people. All of their friends, if they're on Facebook or they're on Instagram or any of these platforms, all of their connections, you can just go out and see. And so they can easily look at all of their connections and say, hey, I'm going to send this to your parents, your friends.
That's exactly right.
And especially at their age, kids aren't as they're just, their brains aren't as formed.
Right.
The world around them is their world. It means everything to them, and so they get really pressured by these threat actors and will do almost anything in order to keep a threat actor from embarrassing them or sending things to their parents or their friends that they don't want to. Right. And again,
and they get scared. They don't want to tell their parents what's going
That's
on
right.
because they're embarrassed.
They're embarrassed by it, exactly. And so, as a parent, trying to talk to my children around, this is a safe space for you to bring issues like this. If something happens, it's okay. It's not a reprimanding space. But if something seems off or you're worried about something, bringing it forward instead of sort of internalizing and trying to deal with it on your own is, I think, a important aspect and an important conversation you have with your children.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've talked about this earlier in the conversation, right? And the first line of defense is the parents. Just like when we were growing up, don't talk to the guy who wants to offer you free candy, right?
Yeah.
So the medium has changed. It's no longer the physical world. It's now the online world, but the message is the same.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's changed is the physicality. When we were kids, the person would actually have to be there, right? The likelihood of someone physically showing up on your street at the time when you're outside without a parent and some candy is relatively low. The proliferation of their ability to talk to hundreds, if not thousands, of children in parallel with very little effort is made this where you don't have to have that proximity. If you have an internet connection, you could be anywhere in the world and engaging with, your kid or your nephew or your niece or your grandchildren and having very adult conversations with really bad intent behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know where this is going to go in the next few years. It makes me very uncomfortable and very uneasy when I think about it, because I don't think it's going to get better. I think it's only going to get worse. And having the parental oversight is just going to become so much more important. And you're a good dad, you're a good parent, but there's a lot of parents out there who are not as engaged with their children, and they're going to be more susceptible to these things online, unfortunately.
Yeah, what makes me scared is, I do cybersecurity for a living. I'm very sort of proactive with talking to my kids about it, and I know they've been approached, right? So, again, I think I feel good that they can bring that to me, but if my kids have been approached, what other kids have been approached where their parents don't know about this? They haven't talked to them at all, and they're trying to deal with this on their own. I think that's what scares me the most. Is just many people don't have this level of knowledge, education, engagement. They don't know what's going on, and that's a really big concern. You don't want a 13-year-old or a 10-year-old or 8-year-old or 15-year-old trying to navigate this on their own.
Right, and I guess the other aspect that's different than when we were children, the hypothetical man with the puppies in his van, more than likely he was a lone actor, right? He was acting by himself. These days, the people exploiting minors, they tend to congregate in communities online, and they share tactics, they share techniques, and they share the exploitation of these minors, and that helps elevate them within their community. So that amplifies the entire problem.
Yeah, they've almost become professionals at exploiting, weaknesses in the minor population, which is even scarier.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
So, Chris, you mentioned that your son enjoys playing Roblox.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you give him some guidance. Maybe you could go kind of step by step. What are the exact instructions and guardrails that you give him to keep him safe?
Yeah, I talked about proximity chat, which I think is just a good idea, but we're a bit more stringent. And I think of it as almost like a two-factor authentication process, right? I separate who he's chatting with from the platform itself and the way that he meets these people. So if he's in Roblox or any other game, whether it's Fortnite or Call of Duty or anything like that, there's no chatting allowed in the platform whatsoever. So he's not allowed to chat through the native platform environment with anyone in the game. What that means is it keeps him from chatting with anyone that he randomly meets online. There's just no chat. It's turned off both to hear it as well as him to actually chat with people.
But he can still chat with his friends.
He can still chat with his friends. So we have a separate chat platform. In this case, we use Discord because I'm on the Discord and I'm in the Discord channel and I can see what's happening there. And he can only then chat with people that he's met. So friends that he goes to school with or friends that he's in sports with. And we validate that as parents. So what ends up happening is, one, he's only chatting with people that he's met in real life through either school or some shared community event. I can validate with those people's parents. And then two, there is just no ability for anyone online to actually start to have a conversation with him. That means that we're turning off text chatting. Some of these games have a lot of text capabilities, and they do a lot of text chatting. We pull that off. Again, everything is handled through a separation of the gaming platform and then the communication channel, and I have much more control over that communication channel and who he's actually engaging with in that way.
Okay. So it sounds like you've got very strict guardrails set up for your son. I'm curious about his friends, though. Do his friends' parents have similar guardrails set up?
I mean, I've encountered both. Some don't even think about it, and so when we reach out to engage, or I see them at a sporting event or neighborhood or what have you, and we talk, it's like, hey, I want to validate that they're communicating with each other online, and a lot of them are like, that's an odd question. Why are you asking me that, right? And so when I start to explain why, and many of them are like, ooh, tell me more. How do I get more engaged? How do I do something similar? So I've seen a lot that just adopt that at least that same principle because it's a good best practice. Some, unfortunately, are just sort of passive about it and a little bit more, laissez-faire around how they're managing their kids' presence online. But a lot are like, oh, this is something that we should do as a best practice. And I would encourage anyone to try to separate, again, the platform from the communication, and that gives you a lot more control of what your children are doing.
And have your children come to you and said that people have reached out to them?
Oh yeah, early on
for nefarious means?
Yeah, so when they first started to get, move into the digital world, again, they're 13, but I feel it's important for them to know how to intelligently engage with the internet and digital technologies, because that's the world they're going to grow up in, and that's essentially the world they need to flourish in. And so as we started to introduce them, with iPads and and then eventually phones, we had conversation on what was appropriate and what was inappropriate. A lot of the technologies have just evolved so rapidly that conversation just continues to evolve. But early on, before I actually separated this whole platform and how we talk, right, the platform that they talk in, my son came to me and he had a group of individuals that he was talking to. They didn't live in the States. They were actually across, they were in Europe. And some of the conversations were adult to adult. They weren't necessarily solicitation, but they were conversations you wouldn't want, a 10-year-old engaged in. Right. And he actually said, hey, there's these things going on and there's these things they're talking about. And so we changed the way that he was communicating. My daughter, also same age, is engaged online and likes to play Roblox and a lot of other things. She plays this game where you can be a horse. I forget the name of the game, and she loves horses. A horse, and you run around the land and you meet other horses, and there's ponies, and you can have horses and all these things. And then you talk to other people that are in the area. Again, it's more of a proximity chat. And yeah, there was definitely someone on there that was, knowing this was largely little girls that are playing this game. There was an adult on there who was roaming around and meeting and befriending girls and then, trying to get them onto another platform. So this happened to my daughter in this particular game. It's one of the ways I was like, okay, proximity chat is no longer a thing. So a lot of the best practices are frankly from having very open conversations with my children, having them be out in the world and open enough to bring me this and saying, okay, we're going to change the way that we're engaging with the technology that you're using. So
yeah. Is it an exaggeration to say that the majority of children, or maybe even every child on these platforms, is being approached at this point?
I mean, I have a sample size of 2,
Right.
but it's 100% for my sample size of 2, and I think that they're pretty savvy, to be honest with you, and so that I would venture to guess that it's pretty significant. Again, we talked about that lawsuit that's out there with Facebook involved. If there are 300,000 incidents a day of someone reaching out to try to solicit a child on the Facebook platform alone, tells you it's probably pretty prevalent across any platform where they can get access to minors. So yeah, I think this is, what I will say is if you're not paying attention to what your children are doing, you're at very high risk that someone has reached out, and maybe they're smart enough to capture it, but again, they know how to prey on the psychology of a child. Right. To your point, there are groups talking about how to do this successfully and how do they prey on the vulnerabilities of a child. So they're just going to get better and better and better at getting what they want. So, I would take a very proactive approach to making sure that you understand what your children are doing, who they're communicating with, how they're communicating, and then how they're securing their accounts overall so that people don't get into their accounts.
Right. So what we're talking about is not some sort of like hypothetical edge case scenario. This is systemic at this point.
It's systemic, yeah.
It's happening to most, if not every child at this point, at some point on these online platforms.
Yeah.
Which is crazy to think about.
Yeah. They are going to encounter it at some point. I don't think there's any doubt. If you're questioning if they're going to encounter it, I would just take that out of your mind and say, my child is going to encounter someone that's going to try to take advantage of them online, and they're either going to do it through, a game that they're playing in or some social account. They're going to do it through an elevated privilege of an account maybe that they've hacked and got into of a friend, which is another way they're getting in a lot. They get in through a trusted friend. Yeah. They elevate the privilege. They say, okay, I'm talking to you now as a friend and you're trusting me. And then we're asking you to do things or blackmailing you through what seems to be a friend's account, but it's been taken over by one of these bad actors. Or they're reaching out through other means, whether it's email or voice or what have you, and trying to get access or control in some way. Yeah.
Let's talk about that for a second. That's very interesting, right? So how are these accounts getting taken over?
Yeah, I mean, there's a handful of methods. One of them is, and the most common one, and I think there was an article recently about just a massive breach of credentials that were out there. The major companies, right? The Facebooks of the world, the TikToks, the Twitter, or X at this point, right? They're having data breaches, and in some cases they don't even know, and you find out months, weeks, years later, right? That these credentials, so usernames, passwords, security keys, things like that, have been leaked online. They're sitting out there in databases that are in the dark web that threat actors know how to get to, and they're just combing through those and then going in and saying, they didn't change their password, this has been out here for a while. Maybe they reuse the same password on their, in one account that then they're using in their socials, and they go and get in. And once they're in, they can change your password, they can lock you out of your account, and then they can start to talk to those that are in your network. They can see all of your communications as if they're you. So a really common one is just data breaches. And so if you're not out there looking at what data breach is out there that you're potentially involved in, and making sure that you're updating and securing your account, changing passwords as that happens, it's one baseline thing that you should be doing.
Well, that's the crazy thing, right? Because I think back 10 or 15 years ago, and a data breach, that would be headline news, right? Like LinkedIn had a big data breach in the mid 2000s, and that was all over the news for days and days and days. I feel like there's disclosure laws now where companies have to notify users that there's been a data breach. But when I see them now, it's just a little email from some legal person and saying, oh, we really respect your privacy and we have security. But it doesn't elevate to the point of, oh, wow, this is actually something I need to pay attention to. It just gets buried in the dozens of emails I receive every day.
Yeah, it's it's the sort of the roulette as it hasn't happened to me yet, right? And I think, one, there's so many breaches, we become desensitized. Right. Everyone just says, oh, my information's out there, and I'm just not going to worry about it. It hasn't happened to me yet. I think the reality is, for those who it has happened to, they wouldn't wish it on their enemy, right? To have your identity taken over, there is really no good mechanism to get back control of that. Once it happens, sometimes you got to start from scratch. Again, they could do nefarious things with it by going to friends, families, etc. But the reality is it's happening every single day.
Yeah.
It's happening in mass. Threat actors are using that information to do all of the various things we've talked about. And you got to stay on top of it because, sure, it may have not happened to you yet. There are a lot of people out there. But if it does happen to you, it is incredibly, incredibly invasive in your life. And to fix it, there's no mechanisms. Someone gets access to your Facebook account, for example, and takes control of that. There's no mechanism to go recover that from Facebook because at that point, Facebook doesn't know if it's you and you are you or the threat actor is you because they have all the information. And it's like that pretty much on any platform you're in. And at that point, the threat actor can do whatever they want as if they were you. And there's it's very difficult to go remedy that. So you asked about, how prevalent is sort of these outreaches happening to minors. I would say for any individual that's got a social account, the likelihood that a threat actor is trying to either get into your account, potentially even has access to your account already, is sitting dormant, is incredibly high. I was talking to someone just a day ago, and as you know, we do a lot of different events, and we try to, we do a free scan on our site where you can go and actually see if you've got, if you've part of any vulnerabilities. So we do some pop-ups and try to bring that to the community.
So I used that scanner last week, and I was shocked at how many breaches my email address had been part of. It was probably close to 12 dozen in the past 10 years.
Like many that run through this, they're just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. I was talking to someone and we were, they said, oh my gosh, it's so funny you mentioned this because earlier today, someone was trying to get into my, I got an email that said, hey, here's your code for your Instagram account reset. That happens a ton. I talk to people everywhere I go, and you wouldn't believe the number of people that are like, oh, just yesterday, I think someone was trying to get into my account.
Right.
Now, in many cases, they may not get into that account, but if you've got some weaknesses in one of your accounts, and a lot of this has necessarily nothing to do with you, that the vulnerability in the platform itself could be there, and you won't get that two-factor, you won't get that, there's ways to get around two-factor as well. So monitoring this and making sure that you've got your credentials protected, that you've got unique accounts, right? We've talked about this so many times, having unique emails for your different accounts so that they can't kind of walk from one account to another account is incredibly important. But this is happening every day in real time, and I spend a ton of time talking about it, and almost every conversation someone's like, ooh, I'm sure most of the people who are listening, like if you're listening to this, you've probably said, there's been something that's happened, and either I have been hacked or someone's tried to hack me, or someone that's been hacked and affected by this. So it is very, very prevalent.
So you mentioned two-factor authentication. I know we've talked about this before, but for folks who aren't familiar with that concept, what does that mean?
Yeah, so let's say someone does get access to your credentials and they log in on a particular platform. A two-factor means that you will have a code, let's say most commonly sent to your phone, that says this is a specific code that you would then need to also enter, so a second factor of identification that you would need to enter in order to authenticate that you're you. The likelihood then is that the threat actor who has your email, who may not be anywhere near you, also doesn't have access to your phone to be able to get that code and get into your platform.
Yeah, so this extra step is a little bit of a hassle, but most platforms support it these days.
Yeah.
Would you consider it optional at this point?
No,
something you should just have on your most important accounts?
No, it's mandatory at this point. If a couple different things I would be thinking about. If I'm engaging with a platform that has any of my personal information or anything important to me, I would not be using that platform if they didn't have two-factor. I mean, it's that important at this point, and it's that ubiquitous that you should be using on every platform that has it. And you should be rethinking any platform that you want to get involved with that doesn't have that. Because breaches are so prevalent, because the access to that information is so easy to get through, you really want to have that as a baseline.
Okay. And you mentioned not using the same password twice, but I don't know about you. There's only so many passwords I can remember in my head. So how can I make that easier?
Password managers are there's plenty of them out there, and they're pretty good. So the ability to generate a unique password, you can do that in a password manager. It will keep track of all of your passwords. Many of them have plugins and things that can help you enter your passwords. A lot of people are used to on your computer, your browser has a password manager.
Right.
I don't recommend necessarily using browser password managers tied to your Google accounts and things like that.
Why not?
Well, a couple different reasons. One, they're usually locked locally on the particular machine. You can tie it to your Google account and things like that. However, if someone gets into your Google account and then can get access to your passwords that way, it's a pretty good way to give them access to everything. I usually keep, and there's a couple of these, a local on-device password manager that can be used in a bunch of different areas and has plugins, and you can authenticate the password manager itself. So, but password managers really help you to have good, strong passwords. So nothing that's like your first and last name is your password is probably a bad idea. But something that's got a stronger, not as easy to hack, and then manage all the different sources that you're.
It's not a plug, but I've been using 1Password for years and years and years. And one of the nice features it has is when you enter a password to a website, it will tell you whether that password's been involved in a previous data breach, so you know not to use it again. Apple's also got a built-in password manager now, which is very good.
Keeper's another good one.
There's a bunch of them out there, but I think the key takeaway is to
use one.
Right?
They'll also tell you if you've used that password before, which is good. A lot of them say, "Oh, you've used this password before. Don't use it again," which is a nice feature. Yeah, it's been a pretty heavy conversation. I think some of it is, we talked off camera for a minute, some of it's hard to talk about because it's so real and some of it's so graphic and so disturbing that mentally it's difficult to even wrap your brain around. But again, I think for parents out there and kids that are listening to this, I think it's important to be incredibly vigilant, get involved, be educated on what threat actors are doing and what these ill-intentioned individuals are doing. And so I appreciate you bringing your expertise and talking about it, and we'll continue to see how things evolve and hopefully help people avoid this.
Yeah, I think that was my big takeaway from today's conversation, is that if you have children, you just have to expect that there's people online going to try to exploit your children. And you're the first line of defense. Like, you have to educate your children on what to look out for. You have to set those guardrails that you were talking about, because this is no longer a hypothetical. It's real at this point.
Yeah.